收看的是公共电视，透过公视，我们看见文化，看见艺术，看见更好的未来。
各位来宾、各位嘉宾，大家晚安。欢迎来到今天晚上一个非常适合听演讲的晚上，也欢迎来到由妈妈监督核电厂联盟所主办的一项今天晚上非常特别的讲座，也就是核能、辐射、我们的健康。谈核能问题，大家谈了很多，从各种的角度来谈，包括了经济、安全、用电，乃至于自然灾害。但是从健康的角度，我相信能够开启我们一种新的思维跟思考的方向。我是主持人李思端，今天晚上当然最主要的，我要介绍接下来我们三位已经坐在台上的语谈者，他们三位都是这方面各自有自己的一个领域的研究。我觉得他们三位各位应该都很熟悉了，除了第一位，因为第一位是他第一次来到我们中华民国台湾，他是 Dr. Helen Caldicott。Dr. Helen Caldicott 呢，她是来自于澳洲，她是一个非常优异的小儿科医师，也曾经在美国的哈佛大学执教。但她很早就了解她的领域跟她的使命绝不局限于教室或医院。过去40年来，她致力于教导世人关于核战、核灾、核武器乃至于核能对人体健康能带来的危害跟影响。他也倡导了很多这方面的组织跟活动，不断地运用各种的方式来教育人群。有一个很著名的故事，他曾经在美国白宫跟当时的雷根总统晤谈，而之后据了解，也促成了雷根总统在日后与戈巴契夫进行了第一次的核武谈判。换言之 ，Caldicott 他自己的贡献不仅只限于对他自己的世人了解他理念的宣导，更可能替人类在免除核灾危机命运上迈进一大步，做出了重大的贡献。他也曾经被美国的 Smithsonian Institution 评选为20世纪最有影响力的女性领袖之一。我们现在就欢迎 Dr. Helen Caldicott。
I come to you today with a deep sense of anxiety and concern about the health and well-being of the people of Japan and of Taiwan and of any other country with nuclear power plants. So concerned was I about Fukushima and the ignorance of the press that I organized a 2-day symposium at the New York Academy of Medicine on the second anniversary of the accident on March 11th and 12th. Titled The Medical and Ecological Consequences of Fukushima, and it was addressed by some of the world's leading epidemiologists, physicists, and physicians who presented the latest data on Fukushima. As you know, the massive Great Eastern Earthquake and tsunami occurred on March 11th, causing the meltdown of 3 nuclear reactors within several days, and such an event has never occurred in the history of the human race. Fukushima is now described as the greatest industrial accident in history. Massive quantities of radioactivity escaped into the air and water and are still escaping as I speak. 3 times more noble gases, argon, krypton, and xenon, than were released at Chernobyl, together with huge amounts of other radioactive elements such as cesium, which causes brain cancer, muscle cancers, testicular cancer, ovarian cancers, strontium, which causes bone cancer and leukemia, iodine, which causes thyroid cancer, plutonium, which causes cancer in every organ of the body. Unfortunately, the people of Japan, and I'm sure Taiwan, were not informed of the accident and the meltdowns for 2 months. Now, a 1,000 megawatt reactor, which is like the 3 reactors very near you, and I would stress that there are 9 million people here living within 40 kilometers of those reactors. If one of them has an accident, you will never escape, you will never be evacuated, and you will all be doomed. That's why they must be closed down. A 1,000 megawatt reactor contains as much radiation as that released by the explosions of 1,000 Hiroshima-sized bombs. And the fissioned uranium becomes 1 billion times more radioactive than the original uranium because 200 new radioactive elements are produced, some which last seconds and some which last millions of years. And that's radioactive waste. And you've got it piling up at your reactors all over the country with only 2 more years of storage before you run out of where to put the stuff. Fortunately for Japan, for the first three days of the accident, the wind was blowing from west to east, so 80% of the radiation blew across the Pacific. I don't know how much radiation Taiwan received, but I'm sure you are within the plume of the radiation going across the Pacific. Then the wind changed and blew from the southeast across much of the Fukushima prefecture, heavily contaminating the ground with fallout, and Tokyo received a considerable fallout. Tokyo is very radioactive. 35 million people live in Tokyo. I'll tell you in a while how cancer is caused by radiation. So concerned was the Japanese government, they were considering plans to evacuate 35 million people from Tokyo during the accident. Thousands of people were fleeing from the smouldering reactors, and the government knew where the plume was going, but they didn't notify the people. So the people fled into the path of the highest radiation dose. To this day, the Japanese people haven't been told really where the radiation is. 600,000 people live in very high radiation areas. Areas that in Russia, after Chernobyl, were evacuated. So the Japanese government is far less responsible even than the then Soviet government. Isn't that interesting? I think that your government is irresponsible too, because from what I hear from listening to people, you are not informed about the medical dangers of nuclear power, and they give you all sorts of fallacious reasons why you need it to turn on your lights, which is not true. And the nuclear power industry dominates the debate. It's time physicians talked about this, because this is going to create epidemics of cancer and leukemia and genetic disease forevermore. And I will describe how that will happen soon. The Fukushima accident is not over. They don't know what to do about it. And every day, more and more and more radiation escapes into the Pacific Ocean. You have a stream, a current, I think, that goes down from Fukushima near Taiwan. Is anybody testing your fish to see if it is radioactive? But they say it's going to take up to 50 years to try and stop the accident. 50 years. Nobody has ever had to cope with 3 nuclear meltdowns right on the edge of the ocean. Meanwhile, there's a building number 4 in Fukushima, and during the earthquake, it became very destabilized structurally. And they just removed all the radioactive fuel from the reactor core and put it in a big cooling pool on the roof 100 feet above the ground. 100 tons of incredible radioactive waste sits 100 feet above the ground. If there's another large earthquake, Building 4 will collapse. Down will come the cooling pool, the water will leak out of it, and the fuel will burn, releasing 10 times more radiation than was released at Chernobyl. That means, if that happens, you will be in great danger. They're talking about having to evacuate 55 million people from Japan, but if the wind's blowing towards you, it's going to be a catastrophe. The Japanese government is not asking anyone to come in and help them. They're trying to reinforce the building, to put a huge crane on top to move those very radioactive fuel rods by remote control. It might take 1 or 2 years for that to happen. Meanwhile, if there's a big earthquake, not just Taiwan, but the whole of the Northern Hemisphere will be severely contaminated. I have 2 grandchildren in Boston. If that happens, I am going to fly my family out to Australia. Why? Because the air mass in the Northern Hemisphere doesn't mix at the equator with the southern air mass, so we don't get the radiation down here, down in Australia. You get it. However, the Pacific Ocean has currents that go all the way around all the time. And our fish is going to be radioactive in Australia. And already they're catching tuna off the coast of California that contains cesium from Fukushima. Don't buy any Japanese food. Don't eat any Japanese food. Don't eat any Japanese fish. All Japanese food exports should be banned from coming into Taiwan. And I'll explain why in a minute. Now, okay, let me explain how radiation causes cancer and what it really means and what are the elements in the reactors. But first I want to show you this is Japan. Now, where's the... So this is, you can see this is Fukushima, and that's a very, very high radiation area, and the blue is still very high, and you can see it came all the way down to Tokyo. And the brown means that all of this area of Japan has been contaminated with radioactive elements. And they will remain radioactive for hundreds of years. This is Chernobyl, and here's the reactor sort of mausoleum. There was a huge explosion here because a stupid man did a stupid experiment in the middle of the night, and the reactor blew up. And it burnt for 10 days, releasing radiation all across Russia and all across Europe and in Scandinavia, and in the United Kingdom. In fact, 40% of the European landmass is now radioactive. People are eating radioactive food. The incidence of cancer is increasing in France. You can see there was no radiation there because the French, who are very arrogant, and they have a lot of nuclear power plants, they said the radiation from Chernobyl stopped right at their border, and it didn't get into France. Then they had to admit later that they had a lot of radioactive fallout. In Cumbria and Wales in the UK, there are about 300 farms growing lambs, and the lambs are so radioactive, the government went to the farmers and said, you have to close down your farms. And the farmers said, well, and they said, because your lambs are radioactive. And the governments and the farmers said, for how long? And the government said, oh, about 100 years. It's not 100 years, it's 300 years, and I'll explain why in a little while. I'm going to explain to you how radiation causes cancer and go from there. Can everyone see this board? So you know that the body is composed of cells, trillions of cells. And in each cell is a nucleus, and in the nucleus are the chromosomes, and on the chromosomes are genes, which control everything about us. But in every cell, there's a gene called the regulatory gene, and it controls the rate at which the cell divides. So if radiation hits the regulatory gene, it damages the DNA molecule. And the cell will sit quietly from any time from 5 to 80 years, and you don't know that your cell has been damaged by radiation. Then one day, the cell starts to divide not just into two, as it should, but into trillions and trillions and trillions of cells. And that is a cancer. It takes one piece of radiation to hit one gene in one cell to kill you. And when you feel a lump in your leg or your breast, or you cough up some blood, you don't know that this cancer was caused by some radiation you ate in a piece of sushi from Japan 20 years ago, because no cancer identifies its origin. But we know from many studies medically of people who've been irradiated that radiation causes cancer. That's it. Now, there are other cells in the body that are more important than those cells, and one is called the sperm, and one is called the egg. And you have half the number of genes and chromosomes in each, so when they combine, you get a normal cell, and it starts growing into a fetus and a baby. Now, every single gene in the sperm and egg is important. And we have human genes, although 99% of our genes are the same as chimpanzees, so we don't really understand things very well. We all carry several hundred genes for disease, like diabetes, like cystic fibrosis, like dwarfism. There are over 2,600 genetic diseases described, and radiation causes mutations. So the more radiation we have in the environment from nuclear power and from medical X-rays and CT scans, the more we are going to see genetic disease happen over future generations, many generations. Because each dose of radiation you receive from the sun, cosmic radiation, from the rocks on the Earth, from a CT scan, from an X-ray, from a nuclear power plant, they all do the same thing. Each dose you receive adds to your risk of getting cancer. It's cumulative. No dose of radiation is safe. No dose. Any radiation you receive can cause cancer years later. No radiation is safe. Background radiation, we think, causes about 30% of the cancers we already see, let alone adding to background radiation by nuclear power plants. Now, a nuclear power plant operating always releases radioactive elements into the air. 2 studies done in Germany and France looking at children less than 5 years of age living within 5 kilometres of a nuclear power plant. The incidence of leukemia in the children is double, and the incidence of cancer is high in the children. It's not safe to live near a nuclear power plant, particularly if you're a child. Now, children are about 10 to 20 times more sensitive to radiation than adults. They get cancer much more readily. And it's interesting, little girls are twice as sensitive as little boys. Women are more sensitive than men. And the fetus is thousands of times more sensitive to radiation. And very important work was done by a woman called Alice Stewart to show that one X-ray to the pregnant abdomen doubles the incidence of leukemia in the baby. Okay? That's why when you are still having periods and you have to have a dental X-ray or another, they say, when was your last period? And they don't X-ray you in the second half of your menstrual cycle because you might have a little embryo in your uterus who would be very vulnerable to being irradiated. So people are very different. The sensitivities of people are very different, and children are particularly vulnerable. Now, what are the elements? I'll just give you a few of the elements that are made in nuclear reactors. One is radioactive iodine. And radioactive iodine goes specifically to the thyroid gland in the neck, right? And it's got a half-life of 8 days. That means in 8 days, you might have a pound. In 8 more days, it decays, so you have half a pound. In 8 more days, a quarter of a pound, right? So you multiply a half-life by 10, so it's radioactive for about 20 weeks. No, 10 weeks. Little more, 10 weeks. And then it decays away to nothing. Now this is a beta and a gamma emitter. So what happened in Fukushima was the people who were running away, but the government didn't tell them that they were immersed in a cloud of radioactive elements, including radioactive iodine. They breathed it into their lung and it went into their thyroid. Now, one way of protecting yourself from radioactive iodine, if there's a meltdown and you know you're going to be exposed, is to take potassium iodide tablets, which blocks the uptake of radioactive iodine in the thyroid gland. Every person in Taipei needs to have potassium iodide tablets in their medicine cupboard. 9 million people. So then you will be aware that you live in great danger living within 40k of 3 reactors or maybe 4. That's the first thing. Now, the second thing is they're looking at children in Fukushima Prefecture under the age of 18. 12 have been diagnosed with thyroid cancer already. 15 more are suspected, and that's within the first 2 years. We did not see thyroid cancer in Chernobyl until 4 years. This indicates that these children got a big dose of radioactive iodine and all the other elements. So in other words, the people in Fukushima are at great risk for developing cancers for the rest of their lives, like the Hibakusha at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The normal incidence of thyroid cancer in children is 1 in a million. And yet the Japanese government has the audacity to say that all these cancers are not caused by Fukushima. The lying that is going on in Japan by the nuclear industry and the government, which are really one and the same thing, TEPCO and the government, and I think it's like this here with Taipower, and your government, is really medically absurd. As a physician, I can't believe that politicians would lie to people about their health, because this is a medical issue. Then the next one I want to talk about is cesium, and I'm sure you've read about cesium. There's a lot of cesium that escaped from Fukushima. Cesium-137 has a half-life of 30 years, so it's around actually for 300 years. And you can't get rid of it. And cesium is like potassium, so it goes to the brain, causing brain cancers. It goes to the muscle, causing very rare muscle cancers. It goes to the testicle and ovary, causing cancers there or mutating genes. Nasty stuff concentrates in food. Strontium-90 lasts for 300 years too. These are both beta and gamma emitters. And strontium-90 is like calcium. So here's a femur. the thigh bone, right? And you get a little bit of strontium-90 in your thigh, and it sends out beta particles and gamma and mutates a cell that forms bone, and so later you get a bone cancer, and you have to have your leg amputated. Or it mutates a white blood cell in the bone marrow, and that white blood cell becomes malignant and fills the whole body up with white blood cells, and that's called leukemia. Leukemia means white blood. The last one I'll describe is plutonium-239. The body thinks this is iron. So it's stored in the liver, where it can cause liver cancer. It causes cancer of the lung. It goes to the bone because hemoglobin is made in the bone marrow, and hemoglobin needs iron. So it can cause bone cancer or leukemia. And in fact, because the body thinks it's iron, plutonium crosses the placenta into the developing embryo. The placenta doesn't let anything through. It's very protective, but plutonium gets through, which can kill a cell that's going to form the left half of the brain or the right arm. And that's called teratogenic. It also concentrates in the testicles, next to the cells that form the sperm, where it can irradiate the sperm so mutations are passed on generation to generation, and it can also cause testicular cancer. The thing about plutonium is it's almost one of the most carcinogenic elements known, such that they say 1/1000th of a gram, 1/1000th of a gram if inhaled into your lung will give you lung cancer. Hypothetically, 1 pound, you can't do this, but if it was distributed in every person's lung on Earth, 1 pound of plutonium, they say, could kill everyone on Earth. Each reactor makes 500 pounds of plutonium a year, or 250 kilos. And that's interesting because all you need to make an atomic bomb is 5 kilos of plutonium. And if you want to make a bomb, you can look it up on the internet. The design to make an atomic bomb is on the internet. All you need is a lump of plutonium like the size of a grapefruit. Plutonium has a half-life of 24,400 years. So it lasts for 250,000 years. And America is selling nuclear power plants all over the world. So when you sell a country like United Arab Emirates or Taiwan a nuclear power plant, you're selling them a bomb factory because they can get the plutonium out of the reactor and make themselves a bomb. Oh, but that's all right because it's peaceful nuclear energy, don't you know? So it's so dangerous. Japan wants to sell nuclear power all over the world. And these men, and they're mostly physicists, nuclear engineers, I don't think they really understand what it's like to treat a child dying of leukemia, or even to deliver a baby, beautiful baby that's born. I don't think they understand what life is about, until one day they might get cancer themselves. And then I know, because on their deathbeds they talk to me and they tell me all the wicked things they've done in their life. Okay, now I want to talk to you about what happens in the food. All of these elements and more landed all over Japan and Europe. So when say, cesium lands on the ground, the grass and the rice suck it up and concentrate it about 10 to 100 times compared to the background level. And then the cow comes along, and I can't draw a cow, except that's the active organ of the cow, the udder. And the cow eats the grass, and it concentrates more, like 100 times, in the cow's milk and the meat. And then a pregnant woman, a lactating woman, drinks the cow's milk, and it concentrates more in her breast. And as it passes through the breast to feed the baby, it can mutate a cell in the breast that can later cause breast cancer. And then the tiny baby is drinking the milk, and this concentrates most highly in the baby. And babies are so sensitive to radiation. So that's called biomagnification in the food chain. And I can't tell you, but so much of the Fukushima food is radioactive. And I heard that they're bringing Fukushima food here and selling it and advertising it, saying it's a good thing to eat. That is criminal. That's like saying, do you want some poison? Ooh, here's some nice poison. Don't worry, you won't get your cancer for 20 years. The government here does not understand. And we have to teach the government and you what the dangers are. That's why we're here. Now, in the sea, huge amounts of radiation are still being released into the Pacific, like untold amounts. So it gets concentrated in the algae, then in the crustaceans, then in the little fish, and then in the big fish, and then us. So that's what happens in the food chain. And of course, you can't taste it. It's invisible. And it takes so long to get cancer, except it's faster in children and babies. I'm a pediatrician, and I care deeply about the future for our children, or even now. And you know, the radioactive waste that is piling up, you've got huge amounts of it. You've got 2 more years of storage. I don't know what the total amount is, but in the world there are about 100,000 tons of this waste coming out of the reactors. 30 tons from each reactor every year. Tons. So, where are you going to put it? You have to store it safely, isolated from the environment for 1 million years. No container, concrete, steel, lasts longer than 100 years. And as these containers rust and fall apart, so the radioactive elements get out and get into the water and start concentrating in the food. And I can imagine generations hence, the people waking up in the morning, the breast milk is already radioactive, the food's radioactive, the babies are being born deformed, and I've got pictures of deformed children from Chernobyl. There are homes full of the most grossly deformed children with no legs and no arms and tiny little heads and tiny little eyes or one eye. And the babies being born deformed and children getting cancer at the age of 6 instead of 60 because they're exposed to radioactive elements in utero. And an increased incidence of genetic disease, much of it lethal. That's the legacy we leave to our descendants. Now, I know Confucius says that one must venerate the elders. But for me as a doctor and a pediatrician, yeah, elders must be venerated, and I like that too because I'm 75. But the most important people in our society are the children and our descendants. What is the legacy we are leaving to our descendants? And that's more important than the elders, I'm sorry. And that's what we must venerate. Our children and our genes and our sperm and our eggs, and protect them for the rest of time. This is a public health issue greater than smoking, because smoking only kills the smoker. Nuclear power is going to kill people forevermore. Now, you have to educate your politicians and say, if you don't close those reactors down, no more reactors in Taiwan, and close them down, we won't vote you into office. But we have to educate people, all the people in Taiwan, through the media. And the doctors have to talk because it's a medical issue. That's all it is. It's a medical issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Karika. 接下来我们第二位语坛人，我相信各位一定也非常的熟悉，尤其让我们想到在2003年的时候，曾经带领我们度过一段在 SARS 侵袭台湾最痛苦、最艰难的一段时间。他除了担任过卫生署署长、国科会主委之外，目前也是中央研究院的副院长。陈建仁陈博士。
谢谢主持人。刚才黑人讲得很清楚辐射对人体健康有什么危害呢？我们以前都有一个错误的观念，特别是刚刚开始我们盖核1、核2厂的时候，常常讲说核能是最干净的、最经济的、最安全的能源。实际上，现在所有的市政告诉我们说，这都是错误的观念。核能厂在正常运作的时候，就能够释放很多的辐射的物质到空气中、到水中，而造成了环境的污染。在环境当中，因为这些辐射物在从土壤进入的植物，它经过了所谓的生物浓缩，再进入到这个动物体，然后最后到生物的整个生物链、食物链的最顶端的人类的时候，实际上我们受到的这个辐射的暴露是相当高、相当风险大的。各位可能还记得，以前曾经在核1、核2厂的这个海域的地方，曾经我们有看到所谓的壁鲷鱼。什么叫做壁鲷鱼呢？就是这个鱼长得好奇怪，既然像驼背的鱼一样，那就是这个鱼的基因已经产生了突变。所以这个突变的情形，不是只有在车诺比这样的一个核灾的情况下我们看得见，连正常的核能厂在运作、排放废水或者是排放废气的时候，就有可能对环境造成很高的危害。那这种辐射的危害，我们是不是能够得到充分透明的资料，来让我们全台湾的老百姓来了解，可能这整个环境已经受到多少的污染？那我们再举一个例子来说，我们最可敬的也是为台湾的人民牺牲的这个达悟族的同胞，在兰屿的同胞，当核废料放在那个地方的时候，请问我们有没有做很完整的长期的健康的追踪？我们是不是有还给他们足够的公道？他们为我们可能受到辐射的暴露，我们有感恩吗？我们做了些什么来回报这一些放核废料地区的居民呢？我们知道在台湾曾经有辐射屋的这个污染，那辐射屋的居民，他们常年住在这个辐射钢筋所建筑的这个房子里面。我们所做的调查里面也发现，他们容易得到甲状腺癌，容易得到白血病，还有淋巴瘤。所以这一些人实际上是受到了很大的影响。那辐射污的剂量有多少？其实辐射污的剂量是相当低的情况下，就已经对人体健康造成很严重的影响。我们来看看日本原子弹爆炸以后，在长期管导、长期追踪者，这些叫做原爆生还者，他的死亡率到现在还是比日本其他的族群要来得高很多。请问核子弹爆炸是什么时候呢？是民国34年，1945年，现在是2013年，已经经过了68年以后，他们的死亡率还是偏高，癌症还是偏高。所以辐射所造成的健康危害是一个很长期的慢性的危害。所以我们今天绝对不能看1天2天的结果就说辐射没有影响，那个是不对的。要看胎儿、婴儿，当然时间很短，可是如果要看辐射对人体健康所造成的危害，需要很长期的追踪。但是辐射不是只有引起癌症，在日本原爆生还者的长期追踪，发现他的心脏血管疾病，譬如说缺血性心脏病或者是脑中风，也有增加的现象。所以整个辐射对人体健康的危害是很可怕的。但是我们常常讲说，哎呀，台湾这个核能都很安全。实际上，台湾核能厂安全吗？我们是不是能够得到充分的资料？我们有对核能厂附近有做很好的环境监控吗？其实台湾是最不适合发展核能的地方。第一个，我们台湾岛很小，人口很密集。第二个，台湾是在地震带，刚才黑人讲，整个太平洋的这个岛屿、岛屿的地方都是 地震很多的地方。我记得以前在国科会的时候，我们在做这个自然灾害的防救中心的时候，我们请外国人来这里跟我们讨论，然后大家都说哇，台湾很了不起，台湾呢是世界上最脆弱的地方，我们有台风、有地震、有土石流。那在这样一个很危险的地方，断层带很多的地方，我们适合在都会区人口600-700万的台北市、大台北市去设第一个核能厂、第二个核能厂，而且好不容易熬到核能厂快要除役了，再来盖一个40年、50年以后才能除役的核能厂吗？所以我在这里想跟大家讲说，我们今天如果大家还没有觉醒，还继续用核能的时候，实际上我们今天是在打赌，赌什么呢？打赌我们自己还有我们子子孙孙的生命，我们是在赌命哦。所以这是一个很严重的问题啊，在这里也要呼吁说，我们大家一定要好好的得到充分的资讯，知道核能还有辐射可能对人体健康的危害，以及台湾可能产生核灾的几率是多少，乘上可能受害的面积，乘上可能受害的人口，以及可能影响的年数。核灾一旦发生的时候，这个辐射物质有可能是会100年、1000年不会消失掉的。所以我们可以在这样地狭人稀，而且天灾频繁的台湾岛上去发展核能吗？另外一个也是很重要的问题，也要来跟大家分享的，就是说，那台湾如果要发展核能，那请问我们的核废料要放到什么地方？刚才讲核废料100，就是1000年的这一个慢慢才能够消失掉。我们什么地方要摆核废料？你家吗？还是你家的后院？大家都说 Not in my backyard， 不在我家的后院我就可以。请问，对核废料来讲，台湾有任何一个地方是可以摆核废料的吗？如果不能，我们现在还要继续累积这些1000年、万年以后会影响我们子子孙孙的核废料吗？然后让他们受到可能辐射污染的危险吗？所以从这一些事情来看，我们就晓得，第一，台湾绝对应该去发展绿色的能源，减少核能的使用，很快的进入非核的家园。第二，现在核能厂附近居民的健康，还有环境的生态，需要做密切的监控。第三，很重要的，如果未来有可能发生核灾的时候，那么台电应该要设立所谓的核灾防救的基金。要不的话，请问一旦发生核灾的时候，那要怎么样去清空台北市？那台北市的房地产90%通通不能够再住人的时候，请问谁来赔偿这么一大笔的财产还有生命的损失呢？所以今天我很简单的耽误大家一些时间来告诉大家，就是说，核能不再是以前所认为的干净、经济而安全，核能在台湾实在不适合发展。所以，让我们好好的检讨，好好的监督核能。希望台湾很快的走入非核的家园，给我们的子子孙孙许诺他一个健康而且能够生活很愉快的一个美丽的宝岛。谢谢。
谢谢副院长。好，接下来这位我相信我们也是非常熟悉，而且她也是妈妈监督核电厂联盟的发起人之一，胡一梦小姐。
今天在座，相信大家都意识到了，我们的2位贵宾对环境、对保育所投入的热情、勇气和受争议的一些非常直言不讳的一种讯息跟一种改造。所以事实上，我的观察是，这个地球上真正要从根本上改变我们现在的经济制度，甚至是我们的能源制度，我们各种的制度，是需要有更多的人真正在内心里面下实修的功夫。这个实修的功夫的人越多，就透过 consumer 消费者本身的觉醒，透过每一个个体本身的一个所谓内在的革命，我们就有可能累积越来越多的人，而这些人开始要拒绝 做那么多的购买，拒绝有那么多的这种所谓电力的消耗，各种样的这些促使这个泡沫化的荣景进步的，一直不断的在增生的这样子的一个可能性，我们要从内在里面开始累积一种认识。而这样的人越多，事实上就是一个全球性的革命，就才能真正的发生。所以这样的革命，事实上是从60年代的灵性觉醒，一直延伸到今天，它已经累积越来越多的人。有很多人开始选择过所谓慢活的生活、简朴的生活，然后真正放下非常多的这种无名的欲望。在我看来，这才是真正的一个可能性。而事实上，各位要知道，今天全球是个体的革命已经开始了。所有你看，从脸书革命开始，全部都是每一个小我在慢慢的在促使这个政府改变。所以我觉得这是一个非常重要的时代的来临。当然，我们外在的所有的专家，就是有外在的数据，有外在的科学的这些根据的一些教育、一些报道，都需要不断的来唤醒群众。同时，我们更需要内在的觉醒，以及每一个人的敏感化、精微化。什么样的能源、什么样的购买活动、什么样的生活方式，才是真正适合我们，才是真正能带来健康跟疗愈的。谢谢各位。
谢谢3位与谈人，自己也有一个问题想先请教陈副院长。您刚刚特别提到了说，希望在台湾，我们有一个充分而透明的资讯去了解究竟在核电对于台湾民众健康的造成的影响。台湾依赖核电已经有将近40年了，您认为目前我们没有这方面的透明的资讯，原因何在？或者说，您是不是怀疑这些所谓的对于健康的危害无法弥补的健康危害，事实上已经造成了，已经发生了？
基本上我们大家都很清楚，在这个原能会呢，它在监控整个核能厂的操作的安全性的时候呢，实际上有很多的资讯并没有对外是公开的，而是所谓机密的。那我个人也很好奇，那到底谁才有机会去监督？代表人民的力量去监督这个原能会所做的管控，对于核能厂所做的这一些监督的工作是不是做得很好？所以我相信所有的资讯是透明是很重要的。我举我刚才施丹举过的例子哈，在 SARS 的时候，我们大家后来都有一点点懊恼，说：“哎呀，为什么在广州产生的时候呢，我们没有办法早一点知道？”所以我们说，疫情的透明、诚实是最重要的，大家可以分享经验，赶快来控制。所以我同样的，到底核能在台湾将近了这个30-40年的这个时间，对环境、对人体健康的危害有多少？有一些资料的分析，但是没有深入的去探索。那如果我们深入去探索的时候，核能厂附近居民健康的状况是很需要做一个完整的评估，然后健康风险评估确定以后才能来进行。
我想最后我就请我们今天3位与谈人说一下他们最后的结语，也贡献给各位。我想先从最后发言的胡小姐开始，好吗？
好，内在环保跟外在环保同样重要。希望大家一起努力。
台湾绝对不适合核能的发展，我们应该发展绿色能源，然后大家呢能够实行节能减碳，让我们把台湾变成一个大家能够平安居住，而且能够很喜乐的在这里居住的好地方。谢谢。
Taiwan can become the energy superpower of the world by quickly converting to renewables. You could do it like that. It would increase the GDP, increase employment, and you would become a star on the world scene, and then everyone would emulate you and copy you.
Thank you. 谢谢 Dr. Pradika 陈建仁副院长，还有胡英文小姐，更谢谢各位嘉宾跟贵宾今天晚上的莅临，希望今天晚上我们的讨论能够带给您新的思考跟新的行动。再会。
台湾缇娜赞要带大家一起欣赏声光效果一级棒的戏偶世界。小小的皮偶代表着一个民族的文化，在同学们的巧妙操纵之下，运用光影之美，创造栩栩如生、色彩丰富的快乐氛围。周六下午4点，台湾缇娜赞，东山国小皮影戏社将带来精彩的《海疆奇航之大圆湾历险》，千万不要错过哦！
马来西亚总理纳吉涉贪案本周以无关刑事犯罪结案，检方宣称纳吉的近7亿美元不明资金是沙烏地王室的礼物，而且已经归还90%，包括560万公务员在内。法国26号发起黑色星期二大罢工，其中抗议 Uber 的计程车司机抗争最激烈。日本校园霸凌严重，罹患创伤症候群的受害者出面控诉。周六周日晚间7点半，全球现场与您一起探索全世界。
我是9天民俗剧团许胜龙团长，非常感谢所有的台湾的民众对9天民俗剧团的一个支持跟爱护。哇，在台湾的路上，好几百尊的三太子在那边比赛，都是一群年轻人，他们用双脚走遍了这个台湾，来认识这个台湾。现在我希望他是有更多的年轻人一起来参与。让台湾有这么好的一个传统义政的一个表演，能够宣扬到国外，也让台湾最美的文化，让全球更多的人知道，让我们的孩子更有自信，找到更棒的舞台，然后去展现他们最好的一个年轻人的生命跟活力。相信公共电视跟我们一样关注这一群的孩子，诚挚的邀请大家跟我们一样一起支持公视制作更多的优质节目。捐款专线是0226339922，邮政划拨账号是19213335。
眼近海的鱼种30年来只剩下1/4。当渔业资源萎缩，海洋生态濒临崩解，如何期待餐桌上能年年有余？该怎么吃才能给海洋留下一条生路？2月1日星期一晚间10点，我们的岛播出《餐桌上的海洋》。
公视首开先例，服务加期。2016年1月2日起，公视主频所播映的《谁来晚餐》《爱的万物论》《一字千金》等节目，还有各类新闻和纪录片，您将可以在播出24小时后上网随选点阅7天。好节目不错过，公视加期，让精彩继续。
大稻埕它对我来说是一个文化运动的基地，也是一个创业的宝地。当时蒋渭水台湾文化协会就是在大稻埕成立的。那大稻埕呢，它对我来讲是一个通往1920年代的时光通道。我们一开始就选定了5种行业这5种行业、5种产业资源是跟大稻埕有关的。第一个是茶，第2个是布，第3个是农产，包含南北货、中药等等第4个是戏曲，第5个是建筑。我们就是直接去承租大稻埕原有的这些屋主，那他们的已经修复好的这些历史建筑，去寻找各种不同的创业伙伴，还有创作人进来，那一起共同去经营这些空间。有书店，有咖啡店，有小酒馆，还有剧场。所以我们并没有要再去重新发明一个大稻埕，实际上我们是在把它原有的精神去做一个新的表达。更重要的是我们所办的活动，我们所做的事情其实有点像是一个实验，怎么样让历史街区同时在产业上面能够振兴，那在文化上面呢也能够复兴。我们是在同时追求这2个目标。
旅行的孤独让思绪清晰，温暖的人情承载了重新出发的厚实力量。全新第2季《浩克漫游》DVD。邀请您与作家王浩一、刘克襄一同从南台湾恒春半岛出发，品尝盛夏滋味，回味老派情调，寻找被遗忘的山海回廊。
元帅意思说，今天就是3出戏，希望都顺一遍嘛。有问题的或者不对的，你把它停一下，再纠正一下，再
为庆贺天后宫铁甲元帅圣诞千秋，马祖秦壁村村民排练了一套京剧，由国光剧团团员不辞辛劳往返台湾马祖亲自指导。这是一个群策群力、排除万难的排练与演出，并逐一勾勒每位演出者不同的生活背景与人物面相。透过戏曲舞台与真实人生的穿插交融，关照表演艺术与宗教信仰支撑起的常民文化。周2晚间10点，记录观点，玉甲戏园，就在公共电视。